Good afternoon. I don't think it's worth us waiting any longer for the people to come on. We were expecting a few more people. Hopefully they will join as and when they're able to, but we are recording the session, so we will make sure it's available for centres to access after today's webinar. So welcome everybody to the first introduction really of the new Level 3 Diploma in Healthcare Support, which will be introduced in April of this year, 2023. So just to talk you through introductions and the purpose of the session today. So my name's Dion Broughton. I'm the product manager for healthcare, childcare and education and training. Now I took over this role in March from my colleague that you probably will remember for healthcare, Raman Gorani. Raman is still in the business, but no longer within our team. I'm joined today by my colleague, Natalie Muller. So Natalie is a development manager in our team, and Natalie is responsible for the development of this Level 3 Diploma in Healthcare Support. So what we wanted to do today is just to really talk you through the background of why we're having a new diploma, why the new diploma is being introduced. We want to give you a look at what the new mandatory content is. We want to look at what the optional units are and the pathways that support the apprenticeships. And then Natalie is going to take everybody through the mapping document that Skills for Health have supplied us with, and how the qualification maps to the healthcare support worker apprenticeship standard. And that's the new apprenticeship standard that was introduced in November. So let's get started. So I'm sure most people know that the healthcare support worker, the apprenticeship standard, was reviewed in early 2022. There was a lot of consultation. Skills for Health were leading on that. There's a lot of consultation around the standard with the Trailblazer group, etc., etc. So we have now found ourselves with a revised version of that apprenticeship standard. It has been agreed and it has been approved for delivery, and it replaced the current version of the apprenticeship standard for all new starts from 1st of November 2022. So the typical duration to gateway is now 24 months instead of the previous 18 months that we had on that standard. If you look on the IFOAT website and you search for the Senior Healthcare Support Worker Apprenticeship Standard, you will see that it has now been replaced. The old one is available in the background, but you'll see for new starts from November 2022, the apprenticeship standard is there. And say now the difference is it's 24 months instead of the 18 months on the previous standard. So the revised standard has retained the requirement for a mandatory qualification, which is the Level 3 Diploma in Healthcare Support. Ourselves and our colleague awarding organisations, we've been working together with Skills for Health to review the Level 3 Diploma, the current Level 3 Diploma, and ensure how it aligns to the revised standards and the knowledge, skills and behaviours in the new apprenticeship standard. So that's what we've been working on over the last sort of probably 9 months now, looking at the new standard and making decisions about the qualification that supports that. Because I'm sure you all know that any mandatory qualification in an apprenticeship standard, it has to show how it clearly defines, it clearly sort of maps to the apprenticeship standard and the knowledge, skills and behaviours within that, which the previous qualification didn't really. There was lots of gaps that Natalie will talk about later on. So that's what we've been working on. So we've been working with Skills for Health and with our colleagues from other awarding organisations to make sure that we all have the same offer, we all have the same qualification. But within that, we wanted to make sure it's clear, and I know centres do know this, that centres are responsible for ensuring that all of the knowledge, skills and behaviours within the apprenticeship standard are delivered to prepare the learner for endpoint assessment. And Natalie will cover that further in the mapping document. So that's the background of why we've got a new level 3 diploma in healthcare support. Okay, so I just want to now take you through the structure of the new diploma, just really looking at particularly the mandatory content, but really touching on some of the optional units. So the new structure, obviously we don't have a qualification number yet because we've not submitted this to Ofqual. We've agreed with Skills for Health and we've agreed with all of the other awarding organisations that we will submit the qualification to Ofqual in March. And every awarding organisation start date for the new qualification will be April. And the reason why that is because once we've submitted this to Ofqual and we've all got our qualification numbers, then Skills for Health need to submit all of our qualification numbers to the Trailblazer group for those qualifications and their numbers to be included in the apprenticeship standard. And that's been the slight difference. Before, the apprenticeship standard just said level 3 diploma in healthcare support. What the apprenticeship now will say is level 3 diploma in healthcare support, and it will list all of the awarding organisations qualifications that have been submitted and approved within that apprenticeship standard. Okay, so age ranges still stay the same as they were, 16 to 18 and 18 plus. What you will now start to see is, so the TQT has now changed. So the TQT is 830 hours. Currently in the diploma it is 650. The 850 TQT reflects the fact that the apprenticeship standard is now 24 months, not 18 months. So the TQT of the qualification has been rounded up to reflect that. Obviously that affects the credit value. So the credit value of the new diploma is 83, currently 65, and the GLH is 491. So mandatory content, 63 credits need to be gained from the mandatory content with 418 GLH. Optional content is still 20 credits. But it's gone from 73 GLH to 194 GLH. Again, that's reflective of the fact that your learners are on programme for 6 months longer before Gateway than they were on the previous apprenticeship standard. Okay, so just a quick look at the mandatory units. Now, currently in the existing qualification, we've got 15 mandatory units. This has now changed and increased to 19 mandatory units. And what I've done here, I've just started listing what the mandatory units are. The ones that I've highlighted in yellow is where we're seeing a slight change. And part of the project that we've been doing, we've been looking at every single unit and we've been making sure that the learning outcomes in that unit map to either the knowledge, the skills or the behaviours in the core of the apprenticeship standard. We've also done that with all of the mandatory units, so I'm sure you can appreciate what a huge job this actually has been. But definitely for the core, for the mandatory, all of the core is covered in these units now. So what we've done as well as part of the review, we've reflected on the language because the units were quite old. So we've reflected on the language. Is the language appropriate? Have things changed, within that sort of subject area? So you'll start to see a few changes that have happened. Unit 4 has become understand mental ill health. I know that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was quite a long title around mental ill health. So again, we've sort of tried to make them more relevant and more and future-proofing really for the next few years of this qualification. So Unit 4 has had a title change, and again, Unit 5 has had a title change rather than really, really long titles. We've tried to condense them down a bit. Unit 6. This is a new unit, and what we did as collaboratively as a group, we looked at the adult care worker. So the responsibility, the existing unit of that was shared with the adult care qualification, and the adult care at level 3, that's already been through a review, and the live qualifications are now in use. So what we did, we looked back at that unit. So the new unit that Skills for Care, had reviewed and supported with awarding organisations. We all felt that it was appropriate that we bring that unit over because it's been reviewed. And we made some amendments to that to be reflective that this was the responsibilities of a senior healthcare support worker, not an adult care worker. But that is a new unit. It's quite reflective of the unit that already was there, but you'll see some changes within there, but nothing that would cause you concern for delivery. Again, Unit 8 has seen a title change. The rest have stayed the same. Unit 12, again, slight title change. And Unit 13, which is a study skills unit, that's had content change. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but so that's had quite a change in that unit, and you'll see why in a moment. Again, mandatory units, what you can see now is you can see where some of the optional units have been brought in to the mandatory units. And again, so Unit 14 in our specification, it's Unit 45, which is in the optional. And again, you can see for yourself where the other units have come from. They were optional units, but they've now been brought in as mandatory units. And that's been part of the consultation and the review, and again, mapping to the apprenticeship standard. All of these units were relevant, and that's why they've been brought in. So we have 19 mandatory units. We, ourselves, Pearson, have included 152 optional units within the specification, and that's something that we'll talk about, but they are mainly, well, not mainly, they are the units that we've transferred over from the existing qualification. So we are proposing, so we have the mandatory units in draft format. So we are going to upload these to the Pearson website under the healthcare support level 3. And I've put the link in here of where that link is, where you'll find that. So if you click on healthcare support, when you click on that, it will give you two options. It will give you healthcare support level 3, and it will give you healthcare support level 3 2023, which is how we're having to differentiate between the two qualifications. When you click on there, it will take you to the new page where the new specification will be. If you click on the course materials tab, that's where we will put temporarily all of the mandatory units. And we'll talk about this in a moment, but our proposal for the optional units, and I think how we're going to have the optional units for you, and hopefully it's agreeable with centres. It's something that we've done for other qualifications. So that's where you will find the draft mandatory units. Now, what Natalie has done, she's put them all into a PDF, and it's one continuous PDF document with all of the 19 units. Now, please make sure these are draft. We are not expecting any changes at this point because we have been through this months of review process with Skills for Health and our colleagues, but it will have draft on the documents. So please, please don't use these. Use these to support the transition and to support the training of your staff and making yourself familiar with what the new mandatory units look like. But please don't go uploading them to your e-portfolios, or please use them, as I say, use them to prepare yourself. But the new spec obviously will be available from March. So that's just a real, please don't, we're not expecting changes, but please don't load them to your systems because they are draft until we take that watermark or embargo off. Okay, so the majority of optional units, as we said, we've taken them out of the existing diploma. Now, we've included 152 optional units, some with slight amends to reflect the KSBs. What we found as we started looking to map optional units, there was less and less mapping because they are so niche and specialist against all of the pathways. So where appropriate and possible, we have mapped, but the core was the most important thing to map. The reason why we've retained 152 is because we did an exercise where we looked at the whole of the units in the qualification and how many times over the last 3 years we'd certificated, and we'd got some units in there that we'd never certificated a single learner, or over a 3-year period it had been 1, 2, 3 learners. So clearly they're not high demand units. So what we've done, we've retained, like I say, 152 optional units that support all of the pathways within the apprenticeship standard. And again, the 6 existing options for the pathways within the apprenticeship standard, they're all being maintained. Now, what we've been told by Skills for Health, that there is no requirement, there is no, within the current specification, you have the pathways where we indicate what units you must take for those pathways. Skills for Health have not indicated that that is the same going forward. However, what we will do within the specification is we will give you guidance, and it is guidance only, on which units best support each pathway. Just to help you make sure that you are, your learner is getting the best units that support the pathway that they're doing. So that's something that we will do. Just going to unlock my control panel, because when I started this, there was just, there are a few more attendees on now. What we wanted to do, I'm going to bring up a poll. So I guess really, Natalie and I have, in a previous development when we developed adult care qualifications, I think it was back in 2018, we decided to introduce a specification that just had all of the mandatory units in it. It has lists of all the optional units, but what we did with that is every single optional unit is its own PDF, its own document, and it sits on the course materials tab on the website. And it's made life a lot easier for centres, because especially if you're using ePortfolio, you can just go and get the unit that you want and upload that unit to ePortfolio. Or if you are still having paper portfolios, you could just print what you want rather than the whole specification. Because I can remember my time in centre, it was a nightmare to have a whole specification, but you only want the mandatory and, I don't know, 6 optional units out of the 150 optional units that you've got in the specification, and sometimes trying to navigate that was a bit of a nightmare. So I'm just going to share a poll, and we just wondered what your thoughts were, whether you would see it as a benefit, or you think that's a good idea that we have all of the optional units housed outside of the specification, and you can just pick and choose as you want. So I'm hoping that you can see the poll now, and you are able to vote yes, you would like to have all optional units outside of the specification, or no, you don't think that's a good idea. I'm not seeing. Has anybody, Natalie, can you see that poll?
Yeah, Dion, I think you have to expand on the control panel that I hope's on all your screens. You just have to expand the little side button downwards where it says polls, and that will open up 2 radio buttons where you can put yes or no.
Okay, if people are able to do that. If not, don't worry, because there's not many people on today. Natalie, we talked about this earlier on, that I will arrange to have a questionnaire sent directly to centres that you can. Yeah, I don't know why I'm not seeing. Somebody's got a hand raised.
Yeah, when I'm actually trying to do it, it's not allowing me to. It's almost like it's greyed out.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening there. Last time when I did this, it came up large on the screen and it showed the answer straight away. Well, that's fine. If people want to put in the chat function or in the questions, if people want to say, yeah, that's a good idea, and we're happy with that, or no, we'd rather have it in the specification. I know it's been running a few years now with the adult care qualifications, and people seem really happy with that, which is why we wanted to introduce it again with the healthcare support. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go on mute and hand you over to Natalie now, because Natalie is going to talk you through the mapping and the mapping document. I have put a copy of the mapping document in the handouts, and again, we were having trouble with switching screens on this one, so I'm not going to pull up the mapping document. Natalie's going to talk you through it, but please pull up your own copy of the mapping document, which is in the little handouts tab on the control panel. And obviously you can download those and keep those for use with your centres. So I am going to just hand over to Natalie now. I shall go on mute.
Thanks, Dion. If people aren't able to access them here for whatever reason, are we able to share them to the delegates after the meeting?
Yeah, I've got everybody's email addresses. So if somebody puts in the chat whether there's a problem downloading or not, and then afterwards I'll make sure that I email it all to you directly.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So what that mapping document shows, if you're able to download it, is a landscape document that on the left side has all the knowledge and skills statements from the what we're calling still new apprenticeship standard that was released in November last year. And in the middle column, it shows a relationship between those specific K&S statements and the current diploma that's regulated and out there being delivered now. And then next to that on the right hand side, it's showing you the relationship between the knowledge and skill statement and the new diploma that will be launching, as Dion said, in April, spring this year. So what I've done as well is, because as you've seen from the mandatory units, some of the unit numbers have shifted around a bit, I've added in on the right hand side what we understand the new unit numbers will be, as long as there aren't any further changes made. But as an example, for the first K1 and S1, that's all around legislation and policies and standards. Currently that's covered in responsibilities of care worker, unit 7, and in the new qualification it's in essentially a similar unit, but it's been expanded to sort of encompass senior healthcare support worker, and that would be unit 6. The thing to look out for, and a point Dion sort of alluded to in her update, was there are some units in the current qualification that don't either entirely map or map at all to the new K&S statements, and also in the new diploma there are some gaps. Some of those gaps are in the mandatory units, and the examples there are basic life support and leadership and role modelling, which weren't things that were sort of deemed appropriate to sort of have as a unit in a qualification, in terms of the basic life support as an obvious example. But in terms of delivering the standard for preparing apprentices for EPA, we have also listed other ways that those aspects of the standard can be delivered. So as an example, the basic life support, I believe, is covered in the care certificate, and I haven't scrolled down far enough to see which element of the care, standard 12 of the care certificate. So I've tried to highlight in red all the areas that they jump out of the standard where there isn't coverage in the mandatory units. As you can probably figure out as you scroll through, on the current the current qualification, there are more gaps than in the version to launch in the spring. But we thought it was useful for those that are continuing at the moment on the existing qualification, because the standard has changed and it's effectively any new registrations you have are on that new standard. We felt you really needed to know and understand where those gaps were with the current diploma, as well as then seeing the linkage relationships with the units and the standard and the gaps from the new qualification. So it's got about, how many pages have we got? It's about 16 pages. It's covering all the knowledge and skills that are represented in the mandatory units. And that's for you to have as guidance to plan your delivery of the standard. So as Dion said, the responsibility is to deliver the standard, and although the qualification provides a really good framework for that, it is employers' responsibility to ensure the whole standard is delivered, both within the mandatory and also the options or pathways that we call them, in terms of whatever pathway those apprentices are doing. And there is guidance in the specification, like what's currently Annex C, which will help you see which units do line up with the pathways, but then employers would need to check that they've delivered the KSBs that sit within each of those pathways and do their own mapping to the units they choose and ensure where there are any gaps, that those gaps are filled. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of the relationship between the standard and the new qualification, as well as the current one, because we do have a little bit of time lag between obviously the standard being published and the new qualification being live. So hopefully that gives you the information you need. If there are any queries about that, feel free to drop a query in the chat and I'll do my best to respond to you on those. I'll hand back to Dion.
Thanks, Natalie. So just the other thing that we wanted to talk to you about today was the study skills unit. I talked earlier on that there is new content to the study skills unit. So just to give you a bit of background of why. So Skills for Health had an expert look at the study skills unit. So they gave it to somebody and said, is this appropriate? Is it, is it relevant, etc., etc. Anyway, the feedback that came back, and we all talked about it as award and organisations, was that it was felt that the current unit does not prepare learners enough to progress to level 4 or 5 programmes. So it's been redesigned considering that feedback. So it's been recommended by Skills for Health. So again, the new unit includes elements of the study skills unit in the healthcare science qualification. So whoever did the review looked at both and has incorporated that. Now, as soon as we put the mandatory units on the website, you will be able to download and see the study skills unit. Hopefully, we've said February, but hopefully we can do that by within the next few weeks and get those units available for you. As I said, they are still draft. We're not expecting any changes, but please accept them as as draft units. So that's really the only other change that's happened with the study skills unit. And I think that's really, yeah, that's the end really of our presentation. So just going to pull the control panel out, and I don't know if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, or just any queries or anything really. Natalie and I will sort of hang on for another sort of 5-10 minutes, and if anybody does have anything that they want to put in the chat, please please do that, and we will try and answer. But as I say, I've put the link to the website where everything will be. What we'll also do is put that mapping document up as well, so that people, it's got this visibility. Because obviously, as Natalie says, if you're currently delivering the new standard but the old qualification, there's quite a few gaps in there that you need to make sure that you pay attention to.
Dion, do you have any plans for further webinars or workshops or anything like that, as the date gets closer?
We haven't at the moment, but we can do. Maybe when we get, maybe when it is regulated in March, we do another webinar with the final specification, and just really go through in more depth. If people want that, but yeah, certainly we'll do another. We'll communicate via the Insight newsletter of all the when the new spec is on the website. So hopefully people are signed up to that. But yeah, we'll look at doing another webinar